The smell of someone else's cologne was what did it. It wasn't mine, and it sure as hell wasn't Emily's perfume. That's how it all started. One quiet Tuesday night, I came home from work, the house empty except for her and the silence, and I picked up the faint scent. It wasn't overpowering, but it was enough to make my stomach twist in ways I hadn't felt before. Emily was in the kitchen, stirring some pot on the stove like everything was normal. But I couldn't stop thinking about that smell. You know how your brain tries to dismiss things? Like, you don't want to go there because it's ridiculous, right? Maybe she hugged someone at work, or maybe it was something she sprayed while cleaning. My mind was racing, trying to find the excuses before the truth could settle in. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake it. I walked up behind her, casually, kissed her on the neck, and waited for her to turn around. She smiled like she always does, that easy smile I'd fallen for years ago. But it felt different now. Forced, maybe. Or maybe I was just being paranoid. "Hey babe," she said, looking up at me like nothing was wrong. That smell still lingered. It clung to her like it belonged. "Where's this cologne from?" I asked, trying to sound as casual as I could, pretending it wasn't gnawing at me. I pointed to her shoulder, acting like it was a joke. She hesitated for half a second. Barely noticeable, but I saw it. "Oh, must have been at work. One of the guys, I guess," she laughed it off, turning back to the stove. "You know how close we all work in the office. Probably brushed up against someone." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something about the way she said it, it didn't sit right. Her voice sounded too light, too rehearsed. My gut told me this wasn't just someone brushing up against her. So I didn't say anything more. Not then. I let it go because I wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. Instead, I sat at the dinner table, chewing on my food, trying to keep up the small talk while my mind worked overtime, connecting dots I didn't want to connect. The next day, though, I knew I wasn't imagining things. I came home early from work, wanting to surprise her, thought maybe we could have dinner together, just us. The kids were at their grandma's for the night. I pulled into the driveway, and that's when I saw it. A car I didn't recognize parked just down the street, engine idling. I didn't think much of it at first, but as I got closer to the house, I saw something that made my heart stop. The front door just barely cracked open. I stood there, staring at it, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. I don't know if you've ever had that moment when everything slows down, and you're caught between rushing in and just standing there like a fool. That was me. Frozen on the spot, keys in hand, heart racing. The silence from inside the house felt suffocating. Finally, I pushed the door open and stepped in. There was no mistaking it this time. That cologne hit me like a punch in the face. Stronger now, fresher. And I knew exactly what it meant. Emily was nowhere to be seen, but I didn't need to see her. I already knew what was happening. There was someone else here. Someone I had never invited into my home, into my life. I made my way through the house, trying to keep my breath steady. The bedroom door was closed. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, hand hovering over the doorknob. I wasn't sure if I could open it, wasn't sure if I wanted to see what was on the other side. But I did. And there she was. Not with some stranger, though. No, this was worse. Much worse. Because the guy sitting on the edge of my bed, shirt half unbuttoned, was my best friend. The world didn't just shatter. It exploded. I stood there, gripping the doorknob so tight it felt like it might snap off. There he was, Ryan, my best friend since high school, sitting on the edge of the bed I shared with my wife, in my house, with his shirt half open like he didn't have a care in the world. Emily was there too, standing by the window, wrapped in nothing but the sheet from our bed. The moment I saw her, I knew. This wasn't some innocent mistake, wasn't some misunderstanding. The air between us was thick, but no one spoke at first. I watched Ryan, waiting for him to say something, to explain, to do anything, but he just sat there like a deer caught in headlights. His eyes darted between me and Emily, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in them. Good. He should have been scared. It's funny how your body reacts to betrayal. My hands were shaking, but I felt cold inside. There was no screaming rage at that moment, just a quiet, simmering fury. It was like everything slowed down. I wasn't even sure what to do next, but the fact that neither of them moved, like they were waiting for me to explode, only pissed me off more. Finally, I broke the silence. "What the hell is this?" I asked, my voice low, controlled. I could hear the tremor in it, though. The disbelief. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. There had to be some explanation, right? Something that would make this scene in front of me go away. Ryan opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. He just sat there, looking like he wanted to melt into the floor. I had never seen him look so pathetic. This was the guy who'd been with me through thick and thin, the guy I trusted with everything, including my family. I trusted him so much that I never even saw this coming. Matt. I didn't mean for this to happen, Ryan finally stammered, his voice shaking as he ran a hand through his hair. He stood up, still keeping his distance, like he thought I might hit him. And in that moment, I wanted to. God, I wanted to. Emily, though. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, her face pale, staring out the window, avoiding my eyes. That silence, her silence, cut deeper than anything Ryan could have said. It was like she didn't even care that I'd caught them. No apology, no shame, just nothing. I turned my eyes to her. "Emily, say something." She didn't move. Didn't even flinch. Just kept staring outside like she wished she was anywhere but in this room. Her indifference was like a punch to the gut. I had imagined so many things happening in my life, good things, bad things, but this? This felt like something out of a nightmare. It's the kind of thing you hear about happening to other people, but you never think it'll happen to you. "Answer me." I yelled this time, the anger starting to bubble over. I took a step toward her, and she finally turned to look at me. Her face was blank, almost like she was annoyed I had interrupted whatever the hell was going on between her and Ryan. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. "It just happened. It just happened." Those were the words she chose. Not an ounce of regret in them, no real apology. Just some throwaway line, as if that could explain everything. As if that could make me understand. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper now. It was like I was talking to someone I didn't even recognize. Emily hesitated, her eyes darting to Ryan for just a second before looking back at me. She still hadn't moved from the window. A few months. Months. I felt like someone had yanked the ground out from under me. Months. This wasn't some mistake, some drunken lapse in judgment. This was something that had been happening under my nose for months. While I was busy being a husband, a father, keeping the house running, trusting the people closest to me, they were doing this. I turned to Ryan, who had stepped back like he was trying to distance himself from the mess he had helped create. His hands were in his pockets now, his head down, avoiding my gaze. "And you?" I asked, glaring at him. "What the hell, Ryan? Months? What the hell were you thinking?" He opened his mouth again, trying to form some pathetic excuse, but I didn't care anymore. It didn't matter. Whatever came out of his mouth would be useless. I wasn't even sure why I was asking these questions. I guess part of me needed to understand how it had gotten this far without me seeing it. I don't know, Matt. I really don't. He trailed off, shaking his head like he was searching for the right words. "I wasn't trying to hurt you, man. I swear to God. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "You didn't mean for it to happen?" I snapped. "Are you seriously standing in my house, telling me you didn't mean to sleep with my wife? You didn't mean to betray me?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. What could he say? I felt my fists clenching, but I didn't swing. I don't know why. Maybe I should have. Maybe if I had hit him, it would have made me feel something other than the cold numbness spreading through me. But instead, I just stared at him, shaking my head. "And what about you?" I asked, turning back to Emily. "You didn't mean for this to happen either? Or did you just not care enough about me to stop it?" Emily's eyes met mine for a second, and for the first time, I saw something flicker there. Regret? Guilt? I don't know. But it wasn't enough. Whatever it was, it didn't make up for what she'd done. "I didn't want it to be like this," she said softly, barely above a whisper. "But I don't know. It just got out of control." "Out of control?" I repeated, my voice rising again. "You're telling me this got out of control like you were just some innocent bystander? What the hell, Emily? You could have stopped this any time. But you didn't, did you? You just let it happen." She didn't answer. She couldn't. We both knew the truth. She had chosen this. She had chosen him over me, over everything we had built together. I couldn't stand to look at them anymore. Not Ryan, who I'd once called my best friend, not Emily, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone. I turned away, pacing around the room, trying to find something to focus on other than the anger building inside me. The pictures on the walls, the furniture, everything in this house that we'd put together, it all felt like a lie now. "I trusted you," I muttered, more to myself than anyone. "I trusted both of you." Neither of them said anything. The room was dead silent again, except for the sound of my breathing, growing heavier with every passing second. I couldn't stay in that room anymore. I couldn't be near them. I walked out, slamming the bedroom door behind me, leaving them in the mess they created. My world wasn't just shattered. It was obliterated. And the worst part? The people responsible for it were the ones I had trusted the most. As I stormed down the hallway, I didn't know what I was going to do next. But I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stormed out of the bedroom and slammed the door behind me. The echo rattled through the house, filling the silence they left behind. I made it halfway down the hall before I stopped, feeling the weight of everything crushing down on me. It wasn't enough. Just leaving them there like that wasn't enough. I needed to deal with this. Face it head on, no running, no distractions. I turned back, marched straight to the door, and flung it open with enough force to crack the frame. Both of them jumped like they hadn't expected me to come back. Emily was still wrapped in the bedsheet, and Ryan hadn't moved from where he'd stood, but they both looked a little paler now. Good. They should have been scared. "Sit," I said, pointing at the bed. My voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge to it. The kind of edge that said I wasn't here for bullshit anymore. Neither of them moved right away, so I stepped forward, grabbing one of the chairs by the corner and throwing it down in front of the bed. I said, "Sit." Ryan hesitated but sat down, his shirt still hanging open like a fool who didn't know how to dress himself. Emily followed, sitting on the bed, holding the sheet tight like it was going to protect her from what was coming. It wouldn't. I sat in the chair, facing both of them, and leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring them down. "You're going to explain this to me," I said slowly. "You're going to tell me exactly how long this has been going on, how it started, and why the hell you thought you could get away with it. Because right now, I'm seconds away from burning this whole thing to the ground." Ryan opened his mouth first, because of course he did. He was always the talker, always the one who thought he could smooth over any situation with a few well-placed words. But this time, there were no words that could make any of this better. "Matt," he began, his voice cracking, "look, man, I swear I never meant for this to happen. I slammed my fist on the arm of the chair, making him jump. "Stop saying that." The anger was bubbling up again, barely contained. "Stop pretending this was some accident. You're sitting in my house, on my bed, with my wife, and you're telling me you didn't mean for this to happen? Just tell me the truth for once." Emily looked away, staring at the floor, like the last thing she wanted was to face me. I wasn't going to let her off that easily. Emily, I said, turning my focus to her, I want to hear it from you. You want me to believe you didn't mean for this to happen? You want me to believe this was all just some mistake? Then say it. She didn't answer at first, just kept her eyes on the floor, her hands clutching the sheet like it was the only thing holding her together. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. I didn't want it to go this far, she said softly, her voice barely audible. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I snapped, leaning forward. You hurt me. You went behind my back with him, I pointed at Ryan, who was looking more and more like he wanted to crawl under the bed. How long, Emily? How long has this been going on? She hesitated again, and I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out how much to say, how much to hold back. But I wasn't in the mood for half-truths. Don't lie to me, I warned. If you lie to me right now, I swear to God. She finally lifted her head and looked me in the eyes, and for the first time, I saw something that resembled guilt. 6 months, she whispered. I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. 6 months. Half a year of betrayal, of sneaking around, of lies. Every late night, every phone call she dismissed as work, every excuse, it all fell into place. 6 months, I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. 6 months of this behind my back. And you, what? You just didn't think I'd ever find out? I didn't think it would go on this long, she said, her voice shaking now. I thought it would stop, but it didn't. I stared at her, feeling that cold numbness settle in again. It was like looking at a stranger. How could she sit there and say this? How could she pretend this was something that just happened? It didn't just happen. They chose this. And you, I turned back to Ryan, who was shifting uncomfortably in his seat. You were my best friend. You came to my house, ate at my table, played with my kids, and all this time, you were screwing my wife behind my back. What the hell kind of person does that? Ryan rubbed his face, looking like he was on the verge of breaking down, but I didn't care. He deserved every bit of this. Matt, I'm sorry, man, he muttered. I never wanted to hurt you either. I don't know what to say. I messed up. You messed up? I stood up, unable to sit still anymore. You didn't just mess up, Ryan. You destroyed everything. You destroyed our friendship, my marriage, my family. He had nothing to say to that. What could he say? He knew I was right. There was no fixing this. I turned back to Emily, pacing the room now because if I stood still, I might lose it. How could you do this to me? To us? To the kids? I asked, my voice rising again. Did you even think about them while you were sneaking around with him? Did you think about what would happen if they found out their mom was sleeping with their dad's best friend? She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes now, but it didn't matter. I wasn't going to feel sorry for her. Not after this. I'm sorry, she whispered again, but it was too little, too late. I know I've messed everything up. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. It just got out of hand. You didn't mean for it to happen? I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You didn't mean for it to happen, but you kept it going for 6 months. You could have stopped it at any point, but you didn't. So don't sit there and tell me you didn't mean for this. You chose this, Emily. Both of you did. The room fell silent again, and I stood there, staring at them, feeling that familiar wave of anger, of betrayal, wash over me. They had ruined everything. Everything we had built, every memory, every moment, it was all tainted now. I walked to the dresser, grabbed the framed picture of Emily and me on our wedding day. We looked so happy in that picture, so full of hope for the future. I stared at it for a moment, feeling a mixture of rage and sadness swell up inside me. Then, without a second thought, I hurled the frame across the room. It shattered against the wall, glass raining down on the floor. Emily flinched, but she didn't say anything. Ryan stood up, like he was going to do something, but I shot him a look that froze him in place. "Get out," I said, my voice deadly calm. "Both of you. Get the hell out of my house." Ryan hesitated, glancing at Emily, but she didn't move. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face, still clutching the sheet like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. I said, "Get out." I yelled, my voice echoing through the room. Ryan finally moved, stumbling toward the door like a beaten dog. He looked back at me once, like he was going to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. "Go," I growled, and he disappeared down the hallway. That left just Emily. She sat there, staring at me, her face pale and wet with tears. "Matt, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Can we talk about this? Can we fix this?" I laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "Fix this? You think we can fix this? You slept with my best friend, Emily. You lied to me for 6 months. There's no fixing this. It's done." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands, but I couldn't feel anything for her anymore. Whatever we had, whatever love I thought we shared, it was gone. "Go to him," I said coldly. "You made your choice." She looked up at me, her face red and tear-streaked, but she didn't argue. She knew it was over. She knew there was no coming back from this. With trembling hands, she stood up, pulling the sheet tighter around herself, and slowly walked toward the door. She paused for a moment, like she wanted to say something, but I turned away, refusing to look at her. "Matt, I'm sorry," she whispered one last time before she disappeared down the hall. I stood there, alone in the wreckage of what was once my life, staring at the broken picture frame on the floor. There was no going back. I spent that night sitting in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen, not sure how to process what had just happened. There was no immediate plan, no grand scheme that came to mind. Just the anger, white-hot and raw. It wasn't the kind of anger that burns itself out quickly, either. It was the kind that simmers, deep and heavy, pushing every rational thought aside until all you can think about is making the person who hurt you feel what you're feeling. I didn't sleep. How could I? Emily and Ryan's betrayal played in my head on repeat, the way they looked, the way they tried to explain themselves, the pathetic excuses. Hours passed as I just sat there, feeling the weight of everything crash down. But by the time the first hint of daylight crept through the blinds, I had made a decision. I wasn't just going to let this slide. There wasn't going to be any working things out or forgiveness crap. Emily had crossed a line, and so had Ryan. They didn't just destroy our marriage or our friendship. They destroyed everything I believed in: trust, loyalty, family. If they thought they could just walk away and start fresh while I sat there with the pieces of my life scattered around me, they were in for a rude awakening. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. I didn't want to hear any talk about reconciliation or waiting to see how things played out. No. I wanted to file for divorce immediately. And not just any lawyer. I contacted the best damn divorce attorney I knew, someone ruthless, someone who wouldn't let Emily walk away with a single thing she hadn't earned. "Matt, you're making the right decision," my lawyer said over the phone. "But we need to be smart about this. If you want to come out on top, you have to play this the right way." That was the thing. It wasn't just about the divorce. It was about ensuring Emily paid for what she did, in every way possible. I wasn't interested in splitting things down the middle or being fair. Fair was out the window the moment I found her in bed with Ryan. We started putting everything in motion. We drew up the paperwork, went over all the assets, and planned out exactly how we were going to handle the kids, the house, and everything else that tied us together. I wanted full custody. No way in hell was I going to let her drag our kids through the mess she created. But that wasn't enough for me. There was still Ryan to deal with. He'd been my best friend for over 15 years, and he thought he could stab me in the back and just walk away? No. He was going to feel it too. I started digging into him. I knew where he worked, who his boss was, and where the skeletons in his professional life were buried. He wasn't squeaky clean, no one in his industry was. He'd told me things in confidence over the years, things about deals he cut, clients he screwed over, shortcuts he took. And now I was going to use all of it. It took a couple of phone calls to some people we both knew, people who had no love for Ryan, and I started feeding them the information they needed to ruin him. It wasn't just about his personal life. I was going after his career, his reputation, everything. Slowly, word started to spread in his office. People were talking. I made sure of it. Ryan would feel what it was like to have everything crumble. As for Emily, she didn't even know what was coming. The day after I caught her, she tried calling me. A few missed texts and voicemail messages, the usual "we need to talk, I'm sorry," that kind of bullshit. I didn't respond. I wasn't interested in talking to her. I wanted her to sweat. I wanted her to wonder what was going to happen next. When the divorce papers were finally ready, I made sure she got them in person. I wasn't going to let her find them in some anonymous mail delivery. I wanted to see her face when she realized that this wasn't just a bump in the road. This was the end. It was a Saturday morning when I had my lawyer serve her. I didn't warn her. I didn't answer her calls that week. I let her think maybe I was calming down, maybe we could still salvage something. But when she opened that door and saw the papers in front of her, I could see it in her eyes, the shock, the fear, the realization that there was no going back. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, searching for some sign that I might change my mind. "Matt," she whispered, her voice trembling, "can we just talk? Please? We can work through this." I never wanted. "No," I cut her off, stepping closer so she had no choice but to look at me. "You don't get to work through this. You don't get to fix this, Emily. You destroyed it." Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. I wasn't going to let her tears soften me. She had already played me for a fool long enough. She clutched the papers in her hands, flipping through them like she couldn't believe it was happening. "Matt, we have kids, we can't do this like this," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "We have kids," "Yeah," I said, my voice cold. "And I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure they don't have to deal with your bullshit anymore." Her face went pale at that. She knew what I was saying. I was going for full custody, and she didn't stand a chance. Not with the evidence I had, not with the way I'd been lining things up. I'd been keeping track of everything for weeks, her late nights, the time she spent away from the house, her constant excuses. And now, with her affair out in the open, I had all the leverage I needed. "You're not going to take the kids from me," she said, her voice shaky, but there was a hint of defiance in it. "Watch me," I replied calmly. "You made your choice. You chose him, not us. Now you can live with it." She stood there, stunned, as I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't care what she had to say anymore. As far as I was concerned, she was already out of my life. But I wasn't done yet. I knew Ryan and Emily still had some kind of contact. They weren't as sneaky as they thought. A few well-placed conversations with mutual friends confirmed it. They were still texting, still meeting up, still trying to figure out what to do next. I could have let it go at that, but I wasn't interested in just moving on. I wanted them to pay. So, I started recording everything. Every text, every phone call I could get my hands on, every bit of evidence that showed they were still involved. And when I had enough, I sent it all to their families. Emily's parents got a package in the mail with screenshots of the texts between her and Ryan. Photos, timestamps, everything. I included a letter, written in the calmest tone I could muster, explaining how their daughter had been sleeping with my best friend for months while we were married. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Ryan's wife, though. She got the full story. I made sure she knew every detail of what he had been up to. It wasn't just about the affair with Emily. I dug up every shady thing he'd done, every little secret he thought was buried, and I handed it to her on a silver platter. It wasn't long before the fallout began. Emily's family was devastated. Her father called me, asking if it was true. I told him everything. He didn't try to defend her. He knew there was no excuse for what she'd done. Ryan's wife left him within a week, taking their kids with her. His life was in shambles, just like I wanted. Emily tried to reach out to me again, but I ignored her. There was nothing left to say. I wasn't interested in reconciliation or apologies. I didn't care if she was sorry or if she regretted it. The damage was done. By the end of that month, I had moved out of the house. The divorce was moving forward, and I was ready to start over. Emily, though? She was left with the wreckage. The house felt like a prison to her now, a reminder of everything she'd lost. And that was exactly what I wanted. I didn't just want to hurt her. I wanted her to feel the full weight of what she had done. And now, with her life crumbling around her, she was starting to realize just how much she had destroyed. But for me, this was just the beginning. I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. It wasn't until about 2 weeks later that Emily finally got me to meet her again. After I served her the divorce papers, I had cut her off almost completely. I didn't answer her calls or her texts. I wasn't about to sit there and listen to her try to explain away months of betrayal. She tried showing up at the house a few times, tried cornering me when I was picking up the kids, but I wasn't having it. I stayed focused on the goal, getting through the divorce, keeping my kids, and making sure she paid for what she did. But eventually, I knew we had to have the talk. The one where everything would get laid out on the table for the last time. I wasn't looking forward to it, but the sooner it happened, the sooner I could close the door on that chapter of my life. So, when she texted me one night saying she needed to talk, that we had to have one final conversation about everything, I agreed. We met at a neutral spot, some cafe halfway between her place and mine. I didn't want her coming over to the house, didn't want her anywhere near my space. I arrived first, grabbed a seat in the back, and waited for her to show up. I was calm. I thought I'd be angry the second I saw her, but by then, the anger had dulled. I'd already done what I needed to do. The divorce papers were in motion, her family knew the truth, and Ryan's life was falling apart. The rage had served its purpose, and now all that was left was the hollow aftermath. Emily walked in about 10 minutes later, looking tired, drained. She hadn't been sleeping well, that much was obvious. Her hair wasn't done the way she used to wear it, and the dark circles under her eyes made her look like a stranger. She saw me, hesitated for a second, and then came over, sitting down across from me without a word. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. We just sat there in awkward silence, like two people who had once known each other but now didn't know what to say. I wasn't about to break the silence first. This was her mess. If she wanted to talk, she'd have to start. Finally, she did. "Matt," she began, her voice shaky, "I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry for everything. For what I did to you, to us, to the kids. I never wanted it to turn out like this." I stared at her, my face expressionless. I'd been waiting for this apology, but now that it was here, it felt empty. It didn't matter anymore. No words could fix what she had done. Still, I let her continue. "I made a huge mistake," she said, her voice breaking a little. "I didn't think it would go this far, but it did. I don't even know how to explain it. I wasn't happy, Matt. I know that's not an excuse, but I was lonely. You were so focused on work, on the kids, and I felt like I was invisible. I felt a flicker of anger at that, but I kept my face calm." "So, you decided the solution to being lonely was to sleep with my best friend?" I asked, my voice cold. "That's how you fix things?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to feel sorry for her. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "No, it wasn't like that. It just happened, Matt. I didn't plan it. I didn't wake up one day and decide to destroy everything." I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "But you did destroy everything, Emily. You didn't just have an affair. You wrecked our marriage. You betrayed me. You betrayed the kids. You blew up our whole life for, what? A fling with Ryan? She winced at his name, but I kept going. I wasn't going to let her off easy. You could have talked to me, I said, my voice rising slightly. If you were unhappy, if you were lonely, you could have said something. But instead, you went behind my back. For 6 months, Emily. That wasn't some one-time mistake. That was a choice you made over and over again. I know, she whispered, wiping away a tear. I know I made the wrong choices. I was stupid, and I don't know why I kept doing it. I wish I could take it back, Matt. I wish I could go back and fix it. Her voice broke then, and she started crying quietly, right there in the middle of the cafe. I could see people glancing at us, but I didn't care. I let her cry. I wasn't going to comfort her. That wasn't my job anymore. If she wanted to feel sorry for herself, she could do it without dragging me into it. When she finally composed herself, she looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. Do you think we can ever fix this? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Can we ever get back to how things were? That question hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I couldn't even believe she had asked it. Did she really think there was a way to come back from this? After everything she had done? After all the lies, the betrayal? I stared at her, feeling a mix of disbelief and anger. No, I said flatly. There's no fixing this, Emily. We're done. We've been done since the moment I walked into that bedroom and found you with Ryan. You broke us. There's no going back. Her face crumpled at that, and for a second, I thought she was going to break down again. But she didn't. Instead, she just nodded, looking down at her hands. I figured, she whispered. I needed to hear it, I guess. We sat in silence again for a while, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I thought about everything we'd been through, all the years we had spent together, the good times, the bad times, the kids. It was like watching a slideshow of a life that wasn't mine anymore. It was a strange feeling, sitting there with her, realizing that the woman I had loved, the woman I had built my life with, was now just gone. She wasn't the same person. Or maybe she was, and I just hadn't seen it before. She broke the silence this time. What about the kids? She asked quietly. How are we going to handle this with them? I don't want them to hate me, Matt. I don't want them to think I'm a terrible person. I sighed, rubbing my temples. The kids were the only thing left that I cared about. I had to protect them from the fallout of this mess, and I wasn't sure how to do that yet. They're going to know the truth, I said firmly. I'm not going to lie to them about what happened. But I'm also not going to make this harder on them than it needs to be. They don't deserve that. Emily nodded, wiping her eyes again. I don't want to hurt them, Matt. I never wanted this to hurt them. Well, it's too late for that, isn't it? I snapped. You didn't think about the kids when you were sneaking around with Ryan. Now you're worried about hurting them? She flinched at my words, but I didn't back down. I wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. I'm going for full custody, I said bluntly. The kids are going to stay with me. You can have visitation, but that's it. Her eyes widened at that. Matt, no. You can't take them away from me. I love them. I'm still their mother. I'm not taking them away from you, I said coldly. I'm protecting them from the mess you made. They need stability. They need someone they can trust. Right now, that's me. She opened her mouth to argue, but then closed it, like she knew it was pointless. She knew I was right, and there wasn't much she could say to change that. I guess I don't have a choice, do I? She whispered, looking down at her hands again. No, I said firmly. You don't. You made your choice when you decided to cheat. Now you have to live with the consequences. We sat there for a few more minutes, the weight of everything settling between us. There was no fixing this. No going back. We were done. The life we had built together was over, shattered by her choices. "I'll always care about you," she said quietly, almost to herself. "But I know that doesn't mean much now." "No," I replied, standing up to leave. "It doesn't." I walked out of that cafe without looking back. I didn't need to see her face again. I didn't need to hear any more apologies. There was nothing left to say. We were over. And for the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. But as I stepped into the cool evening air, a strange sadness washed over me. Not for Emily, not for us, but for everything we had lost. I had loved her once. We had built a life, had kids, made memories. But now it was all gone, erased by betrayal. I shook it off. I had to keep moving forward. For me. For the kids. There was no room for regret. As I walked to my car, I knew one thing for sure: this was the last conversation I'd ever have with her about us. The rest was just logistics, legal proceedings, and moving on with our lives. This was the end. Walking out of that cafe felt like closing a book. Not just a chapter, but the entire damn thing. As I drove home, the weight of it all sat heavy in my chest, but it wasn't the suffocating anger I'd been carrying around for weeks. It was a quieter heaviness, a kind of acceptance that things were never going to be the same. I wasn't sad, not exactly. Just tired. Tired of the lies, the anger, the endless loop of questions that had no real answers. I pulled into the driveway, cut the engine, and just sat there for a minute, staring at the house. Our house. Well, my house now. The place where we had built our life, raised our kids, celebrated birthdays, and argued over dumb things like whether to paint the kitchen blue or white. It was strange how different it all felt now. This house used to mean something, used to feel like the center of our little universe. But now, it was just walls and a roof, filled with memories I didn't want to think about. The kids were inside with my sister, who'd been staying with me off and on since this whole mess started. She had been a rock through all of this, showing up when I needed help without asking too many questions. She was the one who picked up the pieces when I couldn't, and I owed her for that. Big time. I stepped inside, and the familiar sounds of the kids playing in the living room greeted me. For a second, it felt like any other normal night. The sounds of cartoons blaring from the TV, the kids laughing and arguing over who got to pick the next show. But there was an edge to it now, a sharpness that I couldn't ignore. They didn't know everything yet, not the full extent of it, but they knew something was wrong. Kids always know. They pick up on things. The tension in the house, the way their mom wasn't around as much, the fact that I was quieter than usual. They weren't dumb. I found my sister in the kitchen, stirring a pot of something that smelled like spaghetti. She looked up when I walked in, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "How'd it go?" she asked, her voice low so the kids wouldn't overhear. I shrugged, leaning against the counter. It went about how I expected. She cried, said she was sorry. We talked about the kids. She asked if we could fix things. My sister raised an eyebrow at that. Seriously? Yeah, I said, shaking my head. Like there's anything left to fix. I told her we're done. I think she finally gets it now. My sister didn't say anything for a moment, just kept stirring the pot. She had been in my corner from the start, never pushing me to forgive or move on before I was ready. She just listened, supported me, and helped keep things together when I was too focused on the divorce to handle anything else. I didn't realize how much I needed her until this whole mess started. "So, what's next?" she asked after a while, looking at me with that same calm, steady expression she always had. "Next is getting through the divorce," I said, running a hand through my hair. "Then figuring out how to move on, I guess. I'll get full custody. I'm not letting her take the kids." She nodded, like that was a given. "Have you talked to them about what's going on yet?" I sighed, glancing toward the living room where the kids were still arguing over the remote. "Not yet. I will. Soon. I don't know how to do it without wrecking them, you know?" My sister put down the spoon and came over, resting a hand on my shoulder. "They're strong, Matt. They'll be okay. Just be honest with them. You don't have to tell them everything right now, but they deserve to know the truth. I nodded, knowing she was right. I'd been avoiding that conversation because, in some ways, it felt harder than dealing with Emily. The kids were innocent in all of this. They didn't deserve to have their world ripped apart because of the choices their mother made. But there was no avoiding it. They were going to have questions, and they needed answers. Real answers. Not just the sanitized version of the truth. I'll talk to them tomorrow, I said quietly, more to myself than to her. She gave my shoulder a squeeze before stepping back. You're doing the right thing, Matt. It sucks, but you're doing what you need to do. I stayed in the kitchen for a while, helping my sister finish dinner and trying to lose myself in the mundane routine of it all. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Emily. As much as I wanted to push it out of my head, it lingered. Her face, the way she looked so broken, like she hadn't expected this to happen to her. I wasn't sad for her, not really. But there was something unsettling about seeing someone you'd loved for so long become a stranger right before your eyes. The kids ran into the kitchen a little later, demanding dinner and telling me all about the latest episode of some cartoon I couldn't keep track of. I smiled, listened, acted like everything was normal. For their sake. They didn't need to see the storm going on inside me. Not yet. After dinner, after my sister left, I put the kids to bed. That was always my favorite part of the day, the quiet moments where it was just me and them. They still hadn't asked too many questions about why their mom wasn't around as much, but I could tell it was coming. They were waiting, probably hoping things would go back to normal. But normal was gone. I sat in Sarah's room for a while after I tucked her in, just watching her sleep, wondering how the hell I was going to explain this to her. She was only 8, but she was smart, too smart for her own good sometimes. She'd take it the hardest. She was always closer to Emily than I was, always following her around the house, asking questions, wanting to be just like her mom. And now I had to tell her that her mom wasn't who she thought she was. That the family she knew was never going to be the same. Once the house was quiet, I poured myself a drink and sat on the back porch, staring out into the yard. I needed the space to think. To breathe. The divorce was in motion, the last conversation with Emily had happened, and the plan was set. But it didn't feel like closure. Not yet. I thought about the months leading up to this. All the times I should have seen the signs but didn't. The way Emily had become more distant, how she had stopped talking to me about anything real. It all made sense now, but at the time, I was too busy to notice. Too focused on work, on getting through the daily grind, to realize that my marriage was unraveling right in front of me. Maybe that was part of it. Maybe I hadn't been as present as I should have been. But that didn't excuse what she did. That didn't excuse the betrayal. No matter how unhappy she was, there were a million other ways to handle it. She could have talked to me. We could have worked through it, gone to counseling, done anything other than this. But she chose the one thing that couldn't be undone. By the time I finished my drink, I knew what I had to do next. The legal stuff was in motion, and the revenge that had already played out. Emily's life was a wreck now, and so was Ryan's. They got what they deserved. But now it was time to stop looking back. The anger, the pain, it was all starting to feel like dead weight. I couldn't carry it anymore, not if I wanted to move on. Not if I wanted to be the kind of dad my kids needed. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to have that talk with the kids. I sat them down in the living room, Sarah curled up next to me, and Tommy playing with a toy truck on the floor. They were both so innocent, so untouched by the mess that was swirling around them. But they needed to know. I need to talk to you guys about something important, I started, my voice steady. Things are going to be a little different from now on. Your mom and I, we're not going to be together anymore. Sarah looked up at me, her big brown eyes filled with confusion. Why, Daddy? I took a deep breath. Because sometimes grown-ups don't get along the way they should. Sometimes, people make mistakes. Your mom and I love you both very much, but we won't be living together anymore. Tommy didn't say much, just kept playing with his truck, but Sarah stared at me, processing everything. Is it our fault? She asked, her voice small. No, baby, I said quickly, pulling her close. It's not your fault. Not even a little bit. This is between your mom and me. You didn't do anything wrong. She nodded, still looking uncertain, but I could see she was trying to understand. I hugged her tight, feeling that familiar pang of guilt that I couldn't protect her from this. But this was life now. This was the new normal. After I put them to bed that night, I sat back on the porch again, feeling strangely lighter than I had in weeks. The hard part was over. The conversation had happened. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could see a way forward. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. The divorce still had to go through, the logistics of custody had to be worked out, and there would be plenty of tough days ahead. But I wasn't afraid of that anymore. I wasn't stuck in the anger, in the betrayal, in the past. I was ready to move forward. Ready to let go of the wreckage and start building something new. For me. For the kids. For a future that wasn't tied to Emily or the mistakes she made. This wasn't the life I had planned. But it was the life I had now. And for the first time in a long time, that felt okay.